I chose to research this topic because of my upbringing around hospice care, and more specifically around the elderly. I found it very interesting to figure out what plans were currently in place to assist the elderly during and to prepare for a disaster. This picture depicts the elderly population after a major disaster. They are unable to move due to being wheelchair bound and need assistance. This presentation seeks to inform you about what plans are currently in place for the elderly population and how emergency management officials have prepared for a major disaster. A disaster is an event that exceeds the emergency response and recovery capabilities, as well as the resources of the agencies and officials responsible for its management in one or more critical areas of response and recovery. In other words, something large scale that's going to require help from other agencies outside of where it struck. Typically, FEMA will dispatch out to the immediate location of the disaster and take over operations. The elderly population is considered anyone aged 65 or older. This numbered 44.7 million, or 14.1% in the United States in 2013. The elderly are a special needs population, which means they require more assistance and services than adults typically may need. The elderly are typically on oxygen or unable to move for themselves or are wheelchair bound. This makes it a little bit more difficult to move them around in the event of a disaster, and emergency managers need to prepare for this. Ready.gov is FEMA's website for disaster preparedness and serves as a great resource for anyone, particularly the elderly, to prepare for a disaster. It offers step-by-step instructions for creating a plan. Now, in a disaster plan, it is important to cover every idea that possibly comes to mind. Establish a kit with basic supplies needed for survival in it. This includes food, water, shelter, a flashlight, and a weather radio. It is also important to include any special medications or treatments that the elderly population may be undergoing. This aids emergency management people in assisting during a disaster. Florida has some great resources to help the elderly and prepare for a disaster. One of these great resources is the Department of Elderly Affairs website, where I was quickly able to locate several important forms in disaster and preparedness planning. These forms included a rapid needs assessment, directions for completing the form, standard operating procedures for multi-agency response teams, and shelter discharge planning. The Rapid Needs Assessment form is a great tool that asks in-depth questions and information about the individual's name, age, insurance, privacy provisions, and alternate housing options. This form serves as a great way for first responders and emergency managers to determine the exact needs of the individual affected by the disaster. Overall, this website was very informative and clearly states the objectives and plans for a disaster in the state of Florida. This concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for your time.